Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. Today's video is going to be something a little different. Although, let's be honest, I say that every time now, but to my credit, somehow every video still ends up different from the last. But today I want to briefly touch on the ongoing debate, discourse, outrage, or whatever you want to call it, surrounding Christopher Nolan's upcoming film, The Odyssey, and more specifically, the alleged casting of Lupita Nyong'o as Helen of Troy. Now, to be clear, this casting has not been officially confirmed. As of right now, it's still speculation, but that hasn't stopped a lot of people online from completely losing their minds at the mere possibility that Lupita Nyong'o, a dark-skinned African woman, might portray one of the most famous figures in Greek mythology. What I want to focus on here is the sheer hypocrisy on display. I've watched numerous videos and read countless comments from people insisting that Lupita is historically inaccurate casting for Helen of Troy. Many of them cite ancient Greek texts, references to Homer, or generalized ideas about what Greek supposedly looked like at the time. Keep this in mind. The argument usually goes something like this. Helen should be fair-skinned, light-haired, maybe even blonde, because that would be representative of the people of the era. The problem is, there is no definitive description in Homer's works that explicitly states Helen of Troy was blonde, blue-eyed, or even fair-skinned in the modern racial sense people are projecting onto her.
One of the most famous aspects of Homeric poetry is that Helen is never given a concrete physical description. In fact, that ambiguity is one of the defining features of the character. When describing Helen, Homer chose evaluative language, or language that describes how she made people around her feel, rather than concrete details about her appearance. Specifically, Homer chose to use what are known as formulaic epithets, or traditional descriptive phrases that are shortcuts for character descriptions. There is an entire Wikipedia article dedicated to Homer's epithets, and in the context surrounding Helen, you'll see these, which are general epithets that refer to women: white-armed, lovely-haired, and long-robed. It is important to understand that these are not individualized physical descriptions, and that the Odyssey is a narrative poem using poetic language. The most obvious one is white-armed, which people will use to suggest this describes Helen's skin color. It does not. Someone who is white-armed in Homeric expression is someone who mostly stays inside and lives a life of relative leisure. In other words, a person who is not out in the sun working all day. Greece is in the Mediterranean, and we know the people there have various skin tones. This is not to suggest that Homer was describing a black woman of African descent. I am simply debunking the claim that Ryan has made that suggests Helen was physically described in great detail in the Odyssey, because she was not.
Most people have purposely misconstrued ancient texts to fit their narratives. Those assumptions are also largely influenced by centuries of later European art, Renaissance paintings, and modern Western aesthetics, not the source material itself. But even that isn't really the main point I want to argue here. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that people genuinely care about historical accuracy. Let's say they truly want ancient imagery and ancient text to be followed as closely as possible. Fine, I can at least respect consistency. I'm also a big fan of historical accuracy too. But this is where the hypocrisy becomes impossible to ignore, because when it comes to ancient Egypt, yes, I'm going there, suddenly all of that reverence for primary sources, textual descriptions, and contemporary imagery completely disappears. Ancient Egyptians were objectively described by themselves and by neighboring civilizations as dark-skinned Africans. Their wall paintings, reliefs, statues, and written records consistently reflect this. Their gods, their pharaohs, their nobility, and their everyday citizens were depicted accordingly. Yet when we point this out, the response is immediate pushback. Suddenly, people claim that Egyptian art was symbolic, or stylized, or not meant to be taken literally. Some even go so far as to dare claim they were, quote-unquote, tanned people. A ridiculous and unsubstantiated claim, but one that is constantly made in an effort to strip Africa of its history. The exact same people who demand absolute fidelity to Greek and Roman source material suddenly want to reinterpret, downplay, or outright dismiss African self-representation when it becomes inconvenient. So when it's Greek or Roman, source material, texts, imagery, and accuracy, suddenly it all matters. But when it's African, especially ancient African, none of that matters anymore. Then it's just artistic choice. I can't lie, it has been oddly satisfying watching some of these openly racist individuals spiral out of control at the idea of Lupita Nyong'o potentially portraying a figure from Greek mythology, because their reaction exposes something deeper. This isn't really about historical accuracy, it's about who they feel is allowed to occupy certain cultural and mythological spaces. I'll get back to this point later on in the video. Initially, I didn't really care. If I'm being honest, I still don't care that much, and quite frankly, the people pretending to be outraged don't care either, because if they truly cared about historical authenticity, this conversation would have started long before Lupita Nyong'o's name even entered the discussion. Let's actually look at the casting of Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey. The majority of the cast is not ethnically Greek. You have actors of English descent, American descent, German descent, Scottish, Jewish, and even Asian descent. Yet suddenly now, authenticity matters. Nobody had a problem when the Greeks of antiquity were being portrayed by people from all over Northern and Western Europe. Nobody was pulling out ancient texts then. Nobody was demanding genetic continuity or phenotypical accuracy. And it doesn't stop there. Some people have even pointed out that certain actors are too tall to represent the ancient Greek character they're playing accurately. Yet none of that caused mass outrage. None of that sparked viral debates. Why? I'll tell you why. It's because as long as the actors are white, or at least perceived as white, everything is acceptable. Historical accuracy suddenly becomes flexible. The issue isn't authenticity. The issue is who gets to embody power, beauty, and myth. And let's be honest and say the quiet part out loud. This backlash isn't about Greece, it's about white dominance. It's about preserving an image where gods, heroes, and legendary figures are visually tied to whiteness. That's it. Nobody wants to say it, so I'll say it. That's why it bothers them so much that Lupita Nyong'o might portray a goddess. There is nothing that disrupts this worldview more than an African woman occupying a space that has long been reserved, at least visually, for white power. It completely short-circuits that mental framework. What makes this even more ironic is that within Greek mythology itself, Africa is not portrayed as inferior or distant. In fact, Homer explicitly mentions that Zeus and the other gods travel to Ethiopia to feast and dine among the Ethiopians. He goes because the Ethiopians are described as righteous, favored, beautiful, and for their piety and righteousness. And to be clear, the Ethiopians at that time referred to dark-skinned Africans. That alone should complicate the simplistic racial narratives people try to project onto Greek myth. But of course, nobody wants to talk about that part either. And honestly, I won't lie, I find some satisfaction in watching these people get butthurt over this. It feels like a small, petty form of payback after decades of Hollywood giving us films like Gods of Egypt, where African gods were portrayed almost entirely through a white lens. We were told to accept it. We were told it was just artistic license. We were told to move on. So now they can do the same, and I can live with that. Lastly, let's not forget something else people conveniently ignore. The Mediterranean has always been a multi-ethnic region. That includes Greece. Greeks themselves are not a monolith. They range from very light-skinned to very dark-skinned, with diverse features shaped by geography, trade, and migration over thousands of years. That diversity is real, historical, and documented, but it suddenly becomes a problem when it's actually shown on screen. And just to be clear, some people have tried to claim ancient Egypt as a quote-unquote Mediterranean civilization to justify or push the existence of lighter complexion among darker-skinned people, and argued for a multi-ethnic civilization when, objectively, ancient Egypt was a Nile Valley civilization. It was never a Mediterranean civilization. I say this because, suddenly, the same flawed logic they tried to use on ancient Egypt doesn't apply to the actual Mediterranean civilization that is ancient Greece. Anyway, that's all I really wanted to get off my chest. I didn't plan on making this a big thing, but I felt like the point needed to be said. Let me know what you'll think in the comments. I'm mildly interested in Nolan's Odyssey. The story has inspired countless works of fiction, films, TV shows, books, and video games, so it'll be interesting to see how this version plays out. Alright, I'm done. Be sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.